That was great. Nice to know that about Pete Seeger. Oh, gosh. Thank you for having me back. It's been a while. And this preparing a talk with a mind that branches off like mine is pretty hard to do. I've had this on my mind since I contacted Delith. It's over 2 months. And I hope I have put the message together and been working on it and so forth, but and going back in, I went back in to a memory. This is what prompted the talk to begin with. Memories are big. They have influenced us. If you do any reading of Krishnamurti, he says that we are all conditioned. Everything we think and do is influenced by conditioning. So that means that all the stories and memories that have passed through multitudes of generations have contributed to this race consciousness and the conditions that have set up the current baseline of reality. Some good, some not so good, but most have just been accepted without question. But here we are, a product of race consciousness and all the accumulated stories we have collected along the way. Science of Mind says, change your thinking, change your life. I contend that if we want to change society, we have to change our long-held beliefs and stories that turned into myths and paradigms and got passed from generation to generation. We have to trudge through thousands of generations of conditions that have compounded and clogged our consciousness. Not to worry, though. We have tools, especially everyone in this room and on Zoom. Take the tool of the presence of now by Eckhart Tolle. I've got a quote from his book, The Power of Now. Usually, the future is a replica of the past. Superficial changes are possible, but real transformation is rare and depends upon whether you can become present enough to dissolve the past by accessing the power of the now. What you perceive as future is an intrinsic part of your state of consciousness now. If your mind carries a heavy burden of past, you will experience more of the same. The past perpetuates itself through lack of presence. The quality of your consciousness at this moment is what shapes the future, which of course can only be experienced as the now. In light of this, I'm going to ask us to go back into some past memories and be with them for a bit. Bring them to the presence. Not just be in the present, but to bring them into the presence of love. Like I did a few months ago when I was thinking, I'll get through this, I'm thinking about my Grandma Tishy. I could only call her Grandma Tishy because the last name, Martitius, was just too much for a toddler. I thought I was not going to get emotional. She's a Lithuanian immigrant who came here in the very early 1900s. And as I was picturing my 10-year-old self in her kitchen, I questioned what I still may be carrying from those memories. Did I even really know her? What could I be perpetuating with the adherence of this pie in the sky or placing her on a pedestal? Do I even want to go back to Grand Rapids on College Street in her big gardens, and she canned pears and plums, all homegrown, peaches with tons of sugar, sewing her own clothes? I was compelled, I was longing to examine more. So I took a deep contemplative dive into my Grandma Tishy. We often hear that people want to go back to the good old days. I think this is a rather flippant statement. Was I really going back to a happier time with my Grandma Tishy? She's up early in the morning. Did I know that she had stayed up late crying? Did I grasp the reasons why she would wrap a hunk of cheese with the leftover repurposed margarine wrapper for my grandpa's lunch? I remember the newfangled blender that she would make nectar with the overripe fruit that was not good enough for regular snacking. The social interpretation for the practice of not wasting was usually attributed to living through the Depression, something so bad that to our economy and our country that it was to be avoided at all costs. But we all know what happened after that. People went hog wild with progress and conveniences, wastefulness, and boom. That's why we're called boomers. The more I studied this thread in her past, her practices may have come from a deeper sense of poverty, loss, and fear. The old country of Lithuania in the 1800s had fallen to Russian rule. The Lithuanian language was banned and Catholicism was suppressed. This is when I need a good joke. Many Lithuanian families immigrated to the Michigan and Illinois region during the turn of the century. Things must have been extremely difficult there, and their reason to immigrate was deeply embedded for, decades. So Lithuania continued to suffer in World War I until Russia and Germany fell. Then a short-lived period of peace and prosperity until the next invasion in the 40s. When I knew her in the 50s and 60s, her extended family of aunts and uncles, cousins, and her country of birth were being plundered, raped, and pillaged by Russia again. And of course, the Nazis were perpetrating their stuff in Eastern Europe as well. The brutal Russian occupation lasted for 50 years, from the 40s to the 90s, which resulted in thousands of Lithuanians, including the entire intellectual elite, being murdered or sent to Siberia. What was my grandma and grandpa thinking about, or what were they experiencing? If she was sensitive like me, she was probably deeply hurting, but she wouldn't have shared this pain with me. In 1977, my cousin Willie traveled there to get in touch with our grandpa's lineage, and he found a house with dirt floor and a blind elder who made money by knitting. And some American families would regularly send yarn over there so that she could do her work. Well, this one singular memory of a relationship just kept going deeper and deeper, bringing to the forefront some very unsettling energies. I wanted to dig deeper because I wanted to claim the story about me, and I had to know more about her story and my ancestors. The longing within me was not going to stop at this suffering, at this point of suffering that she was experiencing. This cannot be the final truth of it. And how wonderful to find lots of information online, condensed historical data. So what I learned is that the original Lithuanian tribes back in the 10,000 BC to 2500 BC, they existed outside the main migration routes. And then the warriors came. Obviously, there's the Vikings, the Romans, the Crusaders, most of the Baltic populations were eliminated, except for one small tribe of Lithuanians. lasted them all. So my grandparents' lineage must have come from that once small surviving tribe, which led to the eventual consolidation of the whole Baltic region. There was more death and destruction for hundreds of years and during the Teutonic Knights period. But I was more interested in those thousands of years where the forefathers and foremothers of Lithuanians were some of the oldest European ethnicities who lived off the beaten track, away from the early trade caravans, isolated and protected, ideally surviving and evolving in peace and harmony with their environment. So I woke to something. Maybe my grandma's motivation to live in concert with nature was not born of loss and fear, but a long-standing inherent love and reciprocity with the earth. Like the indigenous people of this continent, the indigenous people of Europe hold our generational wisdom. We all come from indigenous people. We are all privy to Earth's wisdom. If our ancestors had lived with the land and away from conflict for all those centuries, what preceded that? Not just historically, but divinely, cosmically. Was there a pattern of perfection or a natural intuitive impulse that kept them safe and thriving for all those millennia? As a science of mind practitioner, I had heard of first cause or this divine perfect pattern, and I tried to find an exact quote by Ernest Holmes, but I couldn't find any. You know, if you know what his book looks like, you know, the Science of Mind book is pretty thick, so here's a compilation of what I think this concept means. The impulse of God, the seed of perfection, the movement of love is present in all things. This pure infinite essence is the source of all life and is available, has always been available, and will continue to be. So was there a divine pattern of perfection in these ancient Baltic communities? Yes, expressing itself closely with nature's ways and needs. Did our ancestors have this perfect pattern inherent within them? Yes, it has continued within our divine lineage, but just kept getting covered up by these other stories of ego and fears. Am I endowed with this first cause, perfect patterning? Yes, as a consequence of being a child of God, not as a consequence of being a granddaughter of Lithuanians. Are you endowed with this seed of perfect pattern within your being? Yes, as an expression of love, the one mind, not because of any story you have lived or are living. Well, this contemplation is still not done. Oh, and I forgot to set my timer, so. Why do we see so much conflict? Why is our human history riddled with wars, loss, suffering, and planetary decline? My answer is because we have accepted stories and memories that have been perpetuating the idea of lack, fear, and separation. Too many people accept these stories as the baseline and live under the belief that inequities are the truth and law of life. If you are one, like me, who does not buy into this conditional thinking, then what is there to do now? This is where I think our memories and our stories are useful. When we visit, just recalling Reverend Annie's talk, stories are important. We are not our stories. In fact, when we visit a memory, I believe we transcend time. Albert Einstein says, time and space are not conditions in which we live, but modes by which we live. In other words, we use time and history and past experiences to define us. Maybe they are disempowering us, keeping us from our deep ability to heal. And I really want to make a point here about the word heal. It means to make whole. And not just our body or our personal lives, but to make whole with everything else, with the rest of life, past, present, and future. We are one. I like to think that memories and reflections on our past stories are portals to transformation. First of all, we have to believe that going back in to a memory is actually an experience of presence. The memory isn't locked into a time capsule. As soon as we experience it in our minds, it has become a thought, and thoughts can change, and changing thoughts lead to changes in our conditions, right? Easy peasy. So what are the barriers? Well, basically, it's our habitual thinking patterns and systems that have pushed the evolution of our minds into habits of thought. Stinking thinking is what Dave referred to it a couple of weeks ago. And we all know how media, corporations, and government have the ability to shape our views and the views of the population. And I think it goes along well with what George Orwell said. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Sounds like a stupid feedback loop to me, taking away our power of the now and our freedom to transform. But where do these barriers reside? How deeply embedded in our consciousness are they? Can they be removed and replaced, transformed or transmuted? I got clarity on that as I was reading the book, The Ending of Time. It's actually a conversation between David Baum and Krishnamurti. And they have a discussion on the differences between the brain and the mind. And here is what they said. The brain, being of time, is merely an instrument of the mind, which is not of time. The human brain has evolved, grown larger over time. The mind does not evolve. And this is a capital M mind. It is changeless, infinite, and operates without time. God equals mind and operates best when the brain is quiet. Basically, the brain processes thoughts and is the machinery that transports messages throughout the body. It is physical and mechanical and communicates with all of the functions and organs and hormones of our body. When the energetic mind is experiencing bliss or sadness, these sensations are picked up on our physical level. The emerging science of epigenetics, I don't know if you've heard about that, but it fascinates me because the effects of multi-generational and historical trauma carried by the body affects the way genes express. This is going to be a wonderful, unfolding of healing for people who have experienced genocide, trauma, abuse, torture, generations, think slavery, think of our American indigenous people. Our stories are important for the purpose of going back through them to find the original first cause seed. And not just our personal family memories, but bigger collective memories that keep getting told and retold, resulting in more separation, inequities, and diminished vitality of the planet. I won't go into too much detail into each one. I made a little list of the ones that I believe are sort of in the top of my thinking. And the intent is not to change the past. We can't do that. Or can we? We can release the unhealthy patterning that continues to repeat. We can free our vision to see anew and think fresh thoughts. These old stories keep us bound to our limitations. Carl Jung said it best when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Well, in this list of collective memories, they do not have to be our fate. The longing of our divine impulse invites us to go back into these accepted stories to unravel them and reveal the perfect pattern of peace, joy, and love. So the first one on my list. Now this is just inviting us to go back and find the divine first cause, but the paradigm of capitalism and that it's supposed to work the best for everybody, or the dominant corporate structure based on extreme consumption in the throwaway society. Don't mean to get political here, but the next one on my list is the paradigm of hierarchy, structure of races and income and ability. Number 3, that the earth and planet, the water, is to be dominated and commoditized. No, we can change that. Yeah. Historical and religious icons or institutions, you know, they're wonderful ways for people to start their seeking path. I happened to come across a book that was in my library, Icon, and I imagine that the power of these images in here and that were perpetrated and the message behind it carries energy that has dominated and directed the course of our history. I'll leave this over there in that room so you can look at it if you'd like. How about the definition of abundance and prosperity? It's not about things, it's not about more wealth. This paradigm, disease and death are failures in living. No. The two-party political government system. We can dig back in and find the first cause of how that could look differently. We have all heard of what fear makes us do, fight or flight. And then later on, I heard fight, flight, or freeze. Does anybody know when freeze got added to that meme? I've experienced freeze and it is no fun. I am adding another word to this phrase. Fight, flee, freeze, or set free. So I'd like to end with a meditation. It's sort of based on the Buddhist tradition of Tonglen, giving and taking, sending and receiving. So as I just bring this to an end, just find a comfortable place to relax in a brief period of silence. I invite you to simply call forth a memory or a story. It can be a person or event from the past or present. It can be a condition that got its start thousands of years ago or a more recent situation. Time has no control over this meditation. And in the quiet of this present moment, send forth your inner light to the space around you. Place your story or your memory in your heart or out in front of you. Allow yourself to be open to send light to this story. allow your openness to receive the light of truth in this memory. No details. You can be very fuzzy. This does not have to be any judgment or analysis. Just light. Imagine this light is your breath. Feel the natural rhythm of this giving of the light and receiving of the light that coincides with the breathing. Release your light. Receive the light of perfect divine impulse. Give healing. Receive wholeness. A healing of the story is making the self whole. The healing of the self is making humanity whole. And with your attention on your breathing in and out and giving and receiving, you may come back to the room, open your eyes. You can take this meditation with you wherever you go because it's your breath. It is your light. Thank you very much. Namaste. Thank you.